Once upon a time, I decided to up sticks from working at a radio station as... Does that go back? Yeah, cool. I want to stay there. Blank screen, yep. So I decided to up sticks from working at a radio station as a music coordinator, announcer and general dog's body, and moved to Sydney to start being an adult and doing proper adult things like getting a real job. I had my heart set on the idea of working on this newish thing called the internet. The thing was, I had no clue. I'd been in touch with friends in Brisbane who ran casino money-funded workshops for women where they learned to code and went to look for something like that in Sydney. Instead, I found out about this thing called The Pod, which was a special little community for creative misfits, but that was in Newcastle. They couldn't really help me, but they did reach out and stay in touch, and they put me onto a company where I did admin after hours in return for using their computing machines and sucking up their internet, and about working out what I could do on the internet. She taught me through GIFs and JPEGs and dots per inch. Somehow, I'd found out about Noise, which was an online youth festival which was looking for online contributions. I'd had an interview with the singer Juliana Hatfield and contributed that, which they weren't expecting. I get an email from Noise and they're asking me to call them. So I get in contact with them and it turns out that Marcus Westbury, who was also part of the pod in Newcastle, decides to give me this job in tech, creating web pages for one of their sponsors. So web page created, I then go on to learn about this internet thing properly through courses and work experience. I then go to London via San Francisco and stay at the house of one of Emma Stone's friends. And in this weird coincidence, Emmy's friends have come to London too. There was Jude. She was part of that Brisbane women's coding group. And there was also her boyfriend, Andrew, who turns out to be one of the most hardcore driven people that I've met in terms of people who you just knew wanted to be something. After much hustling, I get a job through a friend of Emmy's. 9/11 happens and I'm back in Australia. I have my nose to the grindstone of getting back into tech, but there's this sort of lingeringness of being misunderstood, and I've broken my golden rule of never work somewhere that requires a security pass card to get in, with some rather dire consequences. I've been knitting a lot in an effort to pass time on commutes to tech companies and go into textiles full time. Emmy makes the logo of my company, Miss Gusset, and being a sole trader, I spend my cash on yarns over business names. And meanwhile, Emmy has this new housemate. He's this guy from London who's come over to do contract tech work. He's super smart and he's written a stack of books that in hindsight, I guess he seems a bit embarrassed about. They're kind of nerdery, but of the highest order. So, and due to immigration laws, her flatmate can't stay in Australia, so he goes back to London. And here's what I didn't see coming. Emmy goes back to London with him. Next thing I know, they're making a book. And that's why I'm here. This is the book that they made. So this is HTML and CSS, design and build websites. Originally on the cover, it only has Jon Duckett, but I thought I should add in Emmy Stone for the reasons that you're about to see. So the background of this is, before I mentioned Damien Frost, this is his work. So this is his Instagram of Harmony Halo, and since then he's gone on to produce a book called Night Flowers. So what he does is he works in design in London for the opera, creating posters and so forth, and then at night he goes out with a camera and takes photos of these people, and this is what he's created. The other person that I mentioned was Marcus Westbury. He's also created a book called Creating Cities. So what he did was he noticed that there was an issue in Newcastle of there were all these places, all these buildings that had closed down, and the Newcastle that he knew was no more. So the way that he fixed that was that he saw it as being kind of like a software problem. And what he wanted to fix was that he got in a lot of unknown people and unknown businesses who didn't have the opportunity to try things. He got them into Newcastle, he got them into these spaces which weren't being used, and as a result, he's regenerated Newcastle. He's renewed Newcastle. He then went on to another organisation, Renew Australia, and now he's back in Melbourne and he's CEO of a company where they're doing all that again. Oh yeah, here's the logo that Emmy ever so kindly did for me. And I thought it would be fun to actually have this photo of when I was over in Portland, Oregon. As you can see, this is where the hair comes from. When you're trading over there and you're doing yarn trading with over 150 other people, you get a lot of sort of interesting characters, including this lady who's sort of like one of the best known people in the yarn industry. All she does is just create sock knitting patterns. So it was sort of like this weird, I don't know, counterculture that I was involved in, and doing Sock Summit was part of that. Yeah, this is Andrew, the person who I mentioned earlier, who really wanted to be someone and to be famous, and here he is. He's part of Wolfmother, and as a result of this, Jude, who had learnt about building websites and so forth, is now doing their website. So when they were thinking about making this book, I think they were thinking about us, about people like us, about people like Damien Frost and Marcus Westbury and Jude, who needed to build websites. We always thought the programming books were quite intimidating and uninspiring, so we set about reinventing them with our first book, HTML and CSS, Design and Build Websites. Many people said very nice things about it, and it won a Fancy Design Award, and it's been the best-selling book on the topic since its release, with over 150,000 copies sold and translations into an additional 6 languages. We understand that all kinds of people build websites these days, and they don't have a degree in computer science. So we cast our minds back to what we struggled with when we were first learning to code and spoke to teachers to find out what their students found challenging. It uses the same highly visual approach as the first book, including a new topic on each page, and including lots of inspiring code examples. And there's a reason for that. These were the first books that Jon was working on, and that's Jon on the far left there. And as you can see, with these books, there's a certain way that these are created. So when we're looking at these books, in terms of publishing, it's sort of like they're on the music equivalent of a major label. In this case, it was Rox, who had a certain way of doing things. So they had a certain format in their covers, but they also had a certain format in their content as well. And even with, you can see it up the top, they're saying that they're programmer to programmer. We want to be these people who sort of cater to people who already know stuff and perhaps just want to upgrade a little, but you already know the basics of computer programming and certainly computer science. So when it comes to this kind of stuff, we can go into really dry, sort of hefty stuff. And as a result, these books were pretty big and hefty to get through as well. And I think it was a case of Jon recognized this and he was like, well, I've made these books, but they don't really seem to cater to the people that I want to. And it's also, they don't really seem that popular. So what can I do about this? So what they had to come up with wasn't just this case of creating a whole new book. It was also a case of creating a whole new way of publishing. They had to create their own publishing house, which is called Wagon. And as a result of that, what they've done is they've said, okay, so we're going to do the publishing and we're going to do it the way that we want. But where the major label, so to speak, comes in is that they'll be doing the marketing and the distribution for us. That way we have control over our covers and we have control over our content, and we can do whatever we want. We can hire the photographers, we can have the illustrations, you name it, we do it. And as a result of that, this is where they currently are. Something that I'd like you to keep in mind is that this came out in the year 2011. It's 2017, and this is where they still are. With the figures that I gave earlier of 150,000 copies, that was in around 2013, maybe 2014. So given that we're now in 2017, and the other thing to keep in mind is that there's another book out and it's also selling as a bundle, so chances are sales have gone even higher than that. It's pretty safe to say that they've sold around 300,000 copies of this book. These copies sell for around $17 each. So I'll let you do the math, but what we're basically looking at is that they've made a turnover of approximately 5 million with this book, which I think is quite the achievement, and it's certainly one that I didn't see coming, and I'm very proud of them for doing that. So in terms of why this has been so popular, I think part of it comes down to Emmy's background, and that what she has done is a lot of design and illustration. And she has this real sort of childlike way of doing things, which is particularly appealing across like a broad cross-section. She's not the only kind of illustrator who does this kind of stuff. And I think the reason why people go for these sorts of things is that it crosses a lot of sort of cultures and barriers. This book has come out in 6 different languages, and when it comes to illustrations like this, it's something that anyone can relate to. So in terms of this work, she's not the only illustrator. There's also this one. Her name is Vicky Wrong. Emmy and Vicky started out at basically the same time, and they were also involved in an online design magazine called Caliber 10,000. So I thought I should check out what Vicky was up to recently, because I hadn't really sort of checked her out recently, and I was kind of like, wonder what she's up to now. Turns out she's been kind of busy. This is what she's been up to, of creating kids stuff by the name of Octonauts, which has been a worldwide sort of sensation. But it's also a case of, with the illustrations that she does and the way that she works, one of the reasons why this has been so successful is because it crosses those borders, and the sort of idea of gender and language and so forth is just gone, and it's just a case of it's something that people can relate to across the board. It's also the case of, I felt that we should also include a local illustrator who is with us tonight, Dougal McPherson, who does the same thing. This is work that he's done for Ruby Australia for their upcoming RubyConf. And I think one of the really nice things about this, and the great thing about the work that Dougal does, is that it has that communication across the board, and it's something that you just intuitively sort of relate to and get into, which I think is really important in books like that. And he's also done illustration work for a book too. So this is the work that Emmy put into the book. This is basically talking about when you're creating GIFs and JPEGs of the different sort of content that you have, and why you make things into GIFs versus JPEGs. So this was like her GIFs version. And then this is the kind of work that she does when it comes to layout books. Of here, she's talking about block elements and how they work. So she's just got the one sort of image of the bird, and then use that throughout. And also use the same sort of color style throughout the book as well, with a really simple layout. There's also like this little hidden thing throughout the book of when she went over to London, she had to leave her pets here. But the thing was, she got herself a dog when she was in London, and that's Ivy. So this is Ivy here, but Ivy is also throughout the book. So this is what they've done throughout the book is they've got photos of computer screens and different layouts. So this is Ivy showing how Flash is used on a website. This is Ivy entering her email address. So when you're learning about HTML5, email and URL inputs. And this is Ivy as part of a form and learning about form controls. So when you're sort of flicking through this book, there's all sort of like these little sort of code snippets that are coming in of the stuff around Emmy and what she finds important to her, which is really sweet too. So these are the photos that they came up with. So the important thing about this is that they wanted to relate this to people outside of programming. So when they were putting together these photos, they were like, okay, so who is this going to relate to? And one of the big things that they were thinking about was, in particular, bloggers and people who use code snippets without really thinking about it, but who need to learn. People who use Tumblr, people who want to make their own blog or have their own e-commerce site or what have you. It was like, how do we relate this book to those people? And the way that they did it was through photos like this. So what this is they wanted to show the code that was used throughout the book, but they also wanted to have these backgrounds so that it could feel more relatable to people who wouldn't necessarily normally use books like this. So this is Emmy getting into her French stuff. Then they have a map. And this is a more sort of nerd version. You can see that they've got the XML and ASP and so forth. The old school rocks books are still kicking in there, along with some cameras and so forth. So the takeaways from this is that they really had a good think about the audience and how they mattered. And that's something that I want you to keep in mind with your own content, of when you are creating content, no matter how you create it, is do you really know them? It's a case of there was no lack of HTML and CSS books that were out before and after this one, yet this is still the bestseller. And I think the reason is because they took so much time and effort. Jon had already written those books and he was like, how can we make this simpler and how can we make this relatable to people who have never coded before? And it's also a case of Emmy, when she was doing the design, she was like, how can we make this as simple as possible? How can we relate this back to bloggers and to people who are looking for something fresh and new that relates to them and is more inviting to them? And it was also a case of they tested this book out as well before it went to press. And it was also, I think with Emmy, she sort of let it loose to me that, we're going to use your photos, but it was also kind of like, this book is for people like you who started out like this. And I think it's a case of, with all those people and with the at least 300,000 people who have bought it now, it's a case of getting this message out and making it as easy and relatable to them as possible. In terms of standing out, it was a case of breaking the rules for them was necessary, if they had to start their own publishing company in order to get this information out the way that they needed to. And it could be a case that with the information that you have, there might be another way that you need to present that, or something else that you need to do in order to get the information out in the way that you think it's going to be most useful to people. And instead of reinventing the wheel, I guess for this publishing company, because they called themselves Wagon, they didn't create a new wheel. They put it on a new wagon, so it could be a whole new, different thing for them. Thank you very much for your time.